don't waste your energy, Jose, until we get this teed up for you.
It's insane. Oh
Hello, welcome to another episode of the SherTech Podcast, InfoSec with the Three Hacketeers. And we were just going over the podcast subject of today, and Jose started expounding energy, just expressing how ridiculous certain situations are right now. So we just decided to start recording and start talking about, a few different headlines that we have seen recently that we just want to talk about and bring to everybody's attention. So the first one is Change Healthcare and the ransomware attack that happened there, and how it has been wreaking havoc, not just on Change Healthcare themselves, but on medical and dental providers. Because actually, on the actual ground level, the kinds of situations that providers are running into, and I can start with talking about we can get into what happened to Change, but we talk a lot about on the podcast. How does it affect me? How does it affect you? And there are certain dental offices and medical offices that have built their tech stack, their processes and procedures in such a way where they were 100% reliant on Change Healthcare to be able to do their billing in their claims processing. So there are a couple places that I know of that for a couple weeks here have not been able to do anything when it comes to the actual sending out of claims to be processed so that they can get themselves paid for work that they have done. We can get into that. Another thing that is out of some folks' controls is the fact that some folks can't do e-prescriptions anymore. I'm in Pennsylvania. You can still call in a prescription and use your fax machine and do that. But there are some states, I wish I had more info. I don't have more info on this. There are some states that you actually can't do anything but e-prescribe. So I can't imagine what's going on there. I'm sure they've figured out a solution at this point, but you can imagine what that would look like in the early goings of this whole situation if a whole state and all of the physicians and dentists and everybody there could not prescribe things. That's wild. And I'll tee it up. Josh, Jose, you guys want to start talking about it too?
So I'll start by referencing what you were just talking about, Sid. So my son, he was ill. We noticed he was lacking energy, and mostly after exerting himself, doing physical activities, things of that nature. So we scheduled an appointment with the pediatrician. We get to the pediatrician, they look him over. Long story short, he ends up low on iron. He's low in iron, and they needed to prescribe him a prescription for an iron pill. Well, a lady looks over at me and she's like, "You're not going to believe this, but we can't do this digitally, and you're going to have to take this to your where we chose to have the prescription filled. You're going to have to manually take it over there, and you're going to have them fill the prescription for you the old way." And going back to the conversation, when she first said that, I already knew what was going on because Josh and I had talked about it literally probably that same day, because it was right around the time that it started, this whole thing came to fruition. So I go to the place where we had where we were going to fill the prescription, handed them the piece of paper. The guy looks at it and he goes, "Oh," he's like, "the doctor didn't sign this." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, I can't fill this for you because the doctor didn't sign it." I said, "Are you kidding me? This is crazy." So it goes to show you, when something happens like this, just imagine. For my son personally, it was for an iron pill, but could you imagine someone that, high blood pressure medicine, heart medicine, all other kinds of stuff that goes on, cancer medicines, and the same thing happened to them. This was towards the end of the day, and when it happened to me. So I literally had to wait the next day, go get it signed, come back, and have it filled the next day. So, I mean, it just goes to show, like, the system is so fragile, and all that has to happen is one tiny little, attack, ransomware, whatever you want to call it. And when it happens, it destroys everything. Everything gets messed up. And so, I mean, they have been talking about these things for as long as we can possibly imagine. People like us have been saying, hey, do you have an incident response plan? What will you do when this happens to you? Do you have another way of doing it? All these things. And for such a large company, I mean, it affected Sid personally as well. It's one of the largest medical processing billing companies in the United States. I'm not even sure. Are they worldwide too?
I'm not sure about worldwide, but they are the largest in the country.
And they didn't have a plan. Josh, why didn't they have a plan?
I hope they had some kind of plan, because
No,
someone,
they didn't. They were down for a month.
Someone's going to be investigating. But, it goes to show you that we always talk about this for clients and small medical practices. What's critical to doing your business? Well, I got to get paid. To get paid, I got to be able to file claims. Who's your claim person? Okay, it's these people. What happens if you can't utilize them for any reason? You can't utilize them because your system's down. You can't utilize them because their system's down. You can't utilize them because the ISP is down, right? What's the plan? What are we going to do? How long are we going to accept it being down before we go into, whatever emergency stuff we're going to do? And it was great. Like, a non-technical solution. Well, we go back to what we did back in the 90s. We write the prescription on a piece of paper, sign our name, and send it over to the pharmacist, and they can read the doctor's handwriting. Great. Like, that's a plan to get the care done, but that's not a plan to get paid. How long can you go without being paid? A month? 2 months?
I mean, it's crazy.
But people don't want to think about this kind of stuff, right? Because you're talking about the bad stuff. No one wants bad stuff. Good vibes only.
I mean, they're still catching up.
They're still catching up. There's
how long has it been since the original outage?
A little over a month now. And
because we were literally combating this with our clients. They're like, hey, we can't process.
Before Change even announced that something was going wrong, right?
Yeah.
Before Change came out and said something, our clients were reaching out to us, like, hey, this doesn't work. Why can't we do this? Can you help us? And we're sitting there with our hands tied because honestly, we had no way of fixing it.
I mean, we tried.
We tried. But we ran into a brick wall fairly quickly.
Yeah.
And to reiterate here, there's articles out there if anybody wants to look of offices that did 100% of their claims being sent through Change. They haven't been paid in a month. What can that do to your business? And to move on from that too, we talk about reputation on this podcast quite a bit. Josh, I'm going to kick this over to you. There are groups, there are offices, and there are companies that work directly with Change Healthcare that have stated that, hey, we're done. Like, Jose, you're talking about, your insurance company sending you a letter. Like, yeah, we're done. Like, we're moving completely away from Change. So talk about how. I feel like you're gonna be repeating a lot of what you've said, right? But
it's the same thing over and over again. I got a stack of letters on my desk.
That's a nice desk out there.
I got a stack of letters on my desk just in the last 6 months. Hey, Mr. Peterson, it's such and such medical facility. We lost your data. We had a breach. we're going to give you some identity monitor. I've got more years of free identity monitoring than I probably have years of life left. Like, if I could string them together in a row, I'd never have to pay for it.
Oh my God.
But you talk about your reputation. So, you get a letter and they say, well, I was a third party person. What are you going to do? Well, I want to keep you as a customer. So I'm terminating my relationship with this person, or this company. That's just business. That's just what people do. And me as a customer, if I've got a medical place I'm frequenting and they keep losing my information, I get more letters from them. Well, I'm going to go find a new doctor. Doc, I love you, but I'm going to go somewhere else. This is just how these things are. It's not that you had an incident. It's that the incident was bad enough that you had to report it. For healthcare, like reportable incident is a very specific meaning in HIPAA, that you had to report this, and that when the investigation's done, you weren't doing what you were supposed to do. You weren't acting in good faith. You didn't have the plans you were supposed to have. People are going to stop doing business with you. And that's true outside of healthcare. We got some other breaches we might talk about today.
Yeah.
Microsoft. I mean, we could segue into Microsoft here from that. But it's how it is. How is your response? Because there's major companies that have had major incidents and they don't have the reputational damage because they have plans, they have communication, and they've said, we did a thing. Okay, so I'm just going to segue straight into Microsoft. We're talking about that. So this came up on my radar recently because recently I get notified that there's been some source code that was accessed, and I go, well, that's a big deal. So just to run through the timeline real quick, because that is 3.5, almost 4 months now old attack. So Microsoft, they published back in January, hey, we had a nation state attack, right? Advanced persistent threats. You've heard me talk about that in the CMMC and defense podcast. That's a huge thing. So right from the get-go, you tell me you got hacked by an APT, a nation state actor. I'm like, hey, that happens, right? Like, no one expects you to go toe-to-toe with a nation state actor and come out unscathed, right? That's reasonable. So they have this thing, and it's Midnight Blizzard, right? So that's I think it's Fancy Bear is the other.
Fancy Bear.
They're all called Bear something. Yeah. It's yeah, I'm sorry. No, it wasn't Fancy Bear. I'm sorry. It was APT
Fancy Bear.
APT 23, which is Cozy Bear. Excuse me. So that's my there's a lot of bear ones. I do get them mixed up. I apologize. Yeah, it's Cozy Bear. And so they have this notification. Hey, it got in. And this is interesting though. The whole attack was a non-production test account that you would think, and Microsoft says this was segregated. This is a test account. This didn't do anything in production. Has no real privileges, but they leverage this non-production testing account and they get a foothold and they get into emails, right? So then they were like, okay, well, they got into some services. They were looking for email, password spray attack. And then 4 weeks later, 3-4 weeks later, now Microsoft Azure has a massive breach. And it's coming out from the same thing. There's password spray attacks. It's the executives, right? So back in January, they were looking around in the emails. They were looking for their stuff related to them because Microsoft is, involved in this frontline cyber warfare. Well, they get access to the executives, to the C-suite, and cybersecurity people. Right. And then they're going through that. So then Microsoft has to come out. They have to publish more. Hey, they got into the corporate email system. They've been reading our emails. Certain clients, customers, they got to message them. Hey, your email correspondence with us got compromised. But at the same time, they're saying, hey, this is, a nation state actor, right? And they have plans, right? They've been initiating plans. They've been taking steps, taking action. And then finally, this brings us all the way to March. So we've had one disclosure, one notification a month. Well, we've got source code. There's some customer secrets. They're being coy with this, and I don't fault them for this. They're being coy. We don't know what source code's been taken yet. We don't know what customer secrets we're talking about. They're saying it's not your customer data yet. It's really, inside the Microsoft ecosystem. But just to tie it in with the segue, the reputation, like Microsoft, okay, you guys got hacked, but now what are you doing about it? What's your actions? What are the steps you're taking? How worried do I need to be? What alternatives even exist? I know Jose probably has some opinions on alternatives, but that's the timelines. I'll kick it back over to you guys for your thoughts.
I mean, I just think that it makes perfect sense to have an enclave and never trust any Microsoft product. Because why? You're basically putting your stuff in the cloud. You're putting all your eggs into that basket, and then we go through what Josh just talked about. And you can have all the plans and all the responses that you need to have, but they still have your information. Your company's still been compromised. So what I'm trying to say is that you should probably, if you have really, really sensitive data, let's say like CUI, Josh, you probably should have it internal. I mean, there probably it shouldn't be somewhere else.
I mean, Microsoft, if you're going to do CUI in the cloud, I mean, your FedRAMP modified, your what's Microsoft? Is GCC Gov or GCC High? They have two different.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, have three different government and defense related ones, but High or the government, it's huge amounts of money. But if I had that, I'd be calling Microsoft, hey, prove to me, give me some documentation that my stuff's not taken, because if it shows up in a missile somewhere and the government comes knocking, I'm going to put it back on you. And that's just
right.
Reputational.
Yeah. I mean, missile, infrastructure, because we all know infrastructure. I mean, we've talked about this before. Infrastructure is under consistent attack, critical infrastructure.
No, exactly. And we always talk about risk here on this podcast. It's all about risk. Jose's talking about high value data, 100%. What's my data? What's my business? How valuable is my business? Am I a $100,000 a year business? Am I $1 million a year business? Am I a $100 million a year business? That's all predicated. It's 2024. It's all predicated on IT, because IT runs everything now. And all IT boils down to data. This is what it boils down to. So some things for your company, you're going to say, oh, this is low. This isn't as high risk. It can live in a Microsoft cloud, because if Cozy Bear hacks it, it's maybe embarrassing. It's maybe convenient, but it's not critical. If it's critical, even if this is just my 2 cents, even if you're going to throw it up on the cloud because you've figured out the cloud computing is better than on-prem, you should have everything encrypted, so that when Microsoft gets compromised, they don't get your stuff. They just get a bunch of encrypted data, and they go, well, that's all encrypted. We're not going to waste time going after this.
Yep.
Because we don't know what source code means, right? You got access to source code. I hear source code and I think reverse engineering, even if it's not a source code injection where they're going to be able to put malware in a Microsoft patch like we saw with SolarWinds, they're going to be able to read through how Microsoft does things. What can we exploit? What can we make do something that it's not supposed to do? And now all your Microsoft hardware and software, Microsoft software, is potentially compromised, at risk of being compromised. at least for the short term, 6 months, if some patches come out, Microsoft does their thing, maybe the risk goes down, but it's just something to consider. We're just giving you guys, knowledge. I'm not telling you to run away from Microsoft. I'm not telling you to do anything.
No, you're not going to be able to, but you're going to be able to make your own decisions on how you're going to protect yourself from whenever these larger organizations get compromised. So it's part of that planning stage, right? When you're sitting down with the executives, the IT and the cybersecurity folks, they're all sitting around at a table, and they're going over the pros and cons of on-prem cloud. You need to take these things into consideration that could possibly happen.
Can I jump in and ask you guys a question real fast?
Before you do that, one thing I want to get this out here because it's small, but it's important. This whole breach that Microsoft had was a password spray attack.
Yep.
It only worked because there was no MFA on this account. Now, risk assessment, absolutely. This is a tiny account. You can't do anything with this account. Well, obviously, that was wrong. I assume that was the risk assessment, because why wouldn't you have MFA enabled? So we talk about MFA a lot. I know Jose has talked a little bit about how MFA can be defeated, but literally this wouldn't have happened, at least wouldn't have happened this way.
Nope.
If MFA had been in place. So
it can be defeated.
It can be,
but when it's in the way, the chances of someone or something turning away and going to a softer target are high. And that's what you want. You want somebody to say, shoot, I'm not dealing with this. I'm going on to the next person. That's what you want.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Jose, but aren't like 99% of MFA attacks social engineering?
Absolutely. 99.9%. I mean, that's how it happens.
Yeah, so this isn't something that someone's sitting in the dark with their hood up and I'm going to break the MFA.
Typing like this.
Typing like this. That's how you hack. Is you have to hunch over and like gorilla your keyboard. Yeah. That's how you hack. That's hacking 101.
That's right. That's how you do it.
That's how you do it. So so not to derail you, but I wanted to make sure that we got that out there, that a simple like cyber insurance is like, do you have MFA on stuff? Put MFA's places. CMMC, MFA, HIPAA, MFA, PCI, MFA. We're not saying MFA because it makes us money. It doesn't. It's because it's the number one bang for your buck protection against these sorts of attacks. And here we have Microsoft, one of the biggest, if not the biggest.
They're the biggest
firms not having MFA in somewhere. And I can kind of give them, be charitable here. I can see why they probably didn't do it. And I'm not sure on the back end how everything was leveraged.
I wish I could put the emoji with the eyes going back and forth when you're saying that, because I'm just like, I guess I can see why they didn't do it.
I mean, I can see an argument for why they didn't do it. And again, I don't have access to the whole, the whole attack breakdown. But for you, the listeners with small businesses, I mean, MFA should be on everything. If it can be remotely accessed, they should just be MFA. People aren't going to like it. They're going to cry. It's tough. Like
everything. If you are a CEO, if you're a CFO, if you are on a board,
because that's who they're targeting.
You need to have MFA on everything. And I'm not just talking about your business side. I'm talking about your personal side as well, because we've gone through that just recently with someone that we administer. We're a president of a company. All their business stuff was safe. It was MFA'd. Everything was all fine and dandy. We looked at logs. You could see that other countries, nefarious locations were trying to get in, with the logs, but they never did. But they were able to figure out the guy's name's out there. They Googled him. and they started to put two and two together, and they decided to go over towards his personal side of stuff. And unfortunately, when it comes to us, sometimes, for better or for worse, people don't like us to be in their personal side, and we only administer their business side. Well, through the personal side is how they were able to get in, because he didn't have MFA turned on. If you are a high-level executive on a board, manager, you need to have MFA turned on everything.
Yeah, 100%.
Non-negotiable.
So, Sid, now that we derailed your entire conversation,
yeah, Sid, do you remember
MFA,
your question?
I do. I don't remember how I was going to phrase the question actually, but I have the general gist of the question.
Oh,
So
yeah.
given now that we've talked about between everything that happened with Change Healthcare and everything that we've talked about with Microsoft so far, the overall crux of my question is, we talk about risk assessments. There's only so much that companies can and can't do, especially when it comes to what email provider you might have to use. How do folks reprogram their risk assessment to be able to say, well, the risk assessment isn't should we or should we not use Microsoft? It should be more about what data are we putting in Microsoft, or when it comes to just emails, if we need to be emailing sensitive information via Microsoft, what do we need to change about our process to make sure that sensitive information is protected? Because we can't do anything about the fact that we can, let's be real.
That's our workflow.
It's a workflow, but the other
Yeah.
thing is, I'm not sure if we're in a state where we can any longer say that anybody like Microsoft, the biggest companies, they're going to get breached in some way, right? Like, I'm not even trying to throw shade at anybody. I'm cool with Microsoft. But the reality is that they are probably going to get hacked again, or something's probably going to happen to something somewhere. So it's an open-ended question, right? How do we encourage folks to reframe the risk assessment around the idea that we have to use this? How do we best protect? Because something is probably going to happen.
Yeah, I'd say, one, the people doing your risk assessment need to know what they're doing. They need to know how to do a risk assessment. And your organization, especially after you do the first one, the ongoing risk-informed decision-making is really going to where that pays dividends. Because I wouldn't say initially, I have to use Microsoft is off the table, right? Like, there's a risk that's being assumed there. You might say using Microsoft is below my risk tolerance, right? Like, it's an acceptable risk to use Microsoft, or any of the alternatives simply don't work from a business perspective, right? I wouldn't say that that's not worth challenging from a business perspective, that maybe you don't need, or maybe you don't need to use Microsoft everywhere. Maybe your end users are using Microsoft, but something else is using an alternative, I don't know, Linux or something. So you can talk about that. That's something that I think you should talk about and should revisit periodically. And again, I'm not throwing any shade on Microsoft. This is a nation state actor, advanced persistent threat. No one expects anybody to go toe to toe with them and come out, anyone in the private sector. That's not the military. So that's part of it too. Like, how much effort do I want to put into protecting myself from when Microsoft gets hacked by Cozy Bear? How much is that worth? So when we talk about risk assessments, and this is something that I don't think we've talked about, Sid, for a long time. I know we had a risk assessment episode maybe 2 years ago. The whole thing that drives it is I'm going to try and do this as a picture if it doesn't erase my hands. You have a circle. I know, right? You got a circle, right? You got the Venn diagram. You got this circle here. That's your asset, right? Those are the things you have with value. And the more valuable they are, the bigger that circle. And the whole point of the risk assessment is to shed light on the unknown. First, a lot of businesses, they don't even know what their assets are. We're dealing with this with a number of clients, is to go to their IT. What do you have? Why do you have it? And how do you use it? We don't know. We got stuff. You didn't tell me about this stuff. Is that important? Oh, no, that's critical. That's really important stuff. When I asked you what you have, why didn't you mention it? I forgot. You got assets. You got assets. They're important. They make you money. They have a value, usually a dollar value. And then you have vulnerabilities. Some things have more vulnerabilities, bigger circles. Some things have smaller vulnerabilities. And there's an overlap, right? Let's make a Venn diagram here. And then you have the last thing, which is threats, which is your nation state actors, cyber criminals, malicious insiders, and Bob from accounting, who unfortunately doesn't know how to right click his mouse. Bob. And that overlaps. So there's, there's three. You've seen the Venn diagram, right? Where three things overlap, and there's vulnerabilities that affect the asset that the threat can exploit, vulnerabilities that the threat can exploit, but you're not vulnerable to, and vulnerabilities that the threat can exploit but don't affect the asset. And then the real ones that we care about are threats that affect your vulnerability, threats that can exploit a vulnerability that affects your asset. That's what's called risk. So that is what risk assessments are trying to uncover. You find out how big that area of overlap is, and then you talk about what can we do to make that smaller. Do we get rid of an asset? Do we change what it's vulnerable to in some way? Or do we reduce the ability of a threat to make use of a vulnerability? Is that answering your question, or did I go down the totally wrong rabbit trail?
I will never say your information is not useful.
but did it answer the question? Because
I think it was good.
It's been a little while since we talked about risk assessments, but that's the key driver. And I see this with business after business after business. And again, I'm a risk analyst first. Yes, I specialized in IT. There's things outside of IT you got to consider: fire, physical threats, legal, reputational. We talk about IT so much because IT underpins and supports so much of businesses. There's very few businesses out there that aren't reliant on IT, where IT isn't the main asset, or the main asset isn't entirely reliant upon IT. Even if you're a factory, you're like, well, my asset, I make cars, right? And that's my asset. Well, there's machines that people use that make the cars, and that's operational tech. And those machines and operational tech have computers somewhere that run them. And now all of a sudden we're back into IT. So it took 2 steps to get there, but we got there. And so, yeah, we got to talk about threats to the cars because that's a big asset. The OT is a huge asset. But that's what I see as a challenge for companies, is really understanding what your assets are and what the value of the asset is. Hopefully you have a CFO. CFOs are great, because I go to a CFO and I say, what's the value of this? And he says, that is $10,000 a year. Oh, great. That's the value of the asset.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the SherTech Podcast, The Three Hacketeers. If you found value in what you listened to today, please give us a like. Do follow us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. In the description, there will be a link tree that will take you to our social media pages, and you can keep up with us on your favorite social media platform. If you'd like to get in touch with us here at SherTech, please email us at info@sher-technologies.com, which is also in the description. Thanks again, and see you on the next one.